I'm speaking to you today from my home in Vancouver, which resides on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, as most of you are as well. I think we do have a lot of people joining us also from across Canada, so that's exciting. Just to let everyone know that we are recording today's event, and it will be published eventually on our YouTube channel, hopefully just within a few days. We're going to begin our afternoon today. We're going to have Chief Leah George Wilson, who's going to open the event with the Coast Salish protocol. So over to you, Chief George Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you, Christy. Pleasure to see all of you today. ACM Nisiaya, I Tunashkwalawan, quick nalats, and the Sitsia Ama Sialia. Meets up, quitwilum to Tamoch to Tsleil-Waututh, xʷməthkվəy, Sḳwməthkվəy. Greetings to our guests and our dear ones. I have good feelings in my heart to see all of you today in our language called Hunkamitnum, Downriver Halkamelum. I said my name's Sitsia Ama Sialia. I welcomed you to Coast Salish territory, home to Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish, thanking all of you for being here today.
That's great. Thank you, Chief George Wilson. Thank you very much. As I mentioned before, I am Christy, your host today from For Our Kids Vancouver. We are the local chapter of the National For Our Kids Network, made up of parents and grandparents from across Canada, committed to taking action to address the climate crisis. Our aim is to take any form of collective action, no matter how small it seems, to advance solutions to the climate crisis. One such action is hosting this town hall on a green and just recovery with our government representatives today. Other virtual town halls have been organized by For Our Kids across the country. Most recently, it was last night in North Vancouver, and we have another one coming up in London, Ontario on July 22nd. Just by being here today and engaging in this very important dialogue, you are taking action to join the global movement to call on governments to commit to a green and just recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you everyone for being here. Without further ado, let's begin our town hall. Our panel this afternoon, we have Chief Leah George Wilson of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, the Honorable George Heyman, MLA for Vancouver-Fairview and BC's Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. We have an MP from Vancouver East, Ms. Jenny Kwan, welcome, and Vancouver City Councillor Christine Boyle. Our event today will be co-moderated by Andrea Reimer, a public servant and organizer, as well as Zoe Ng from Sustainabiliteens. So let's get started. Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, Christy, and thank you, Chief George Wilson, for the welcome to the territory. I'm coming to you today from the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh here in East Vancouver. As you heard, my name's Andrea Reimer. I actually recognize some of you on the call. For those that don't know who I am a former city councillor. I spent 3 terms on city councillor in Vancouver. Notably, I led on a number of things, but notably for this today's event, I was the lead on the Greenest City Action Plan, as well as the effort, the successful effort to get Vancouver to commit to 100% renewable energy for electricity, heating, cooling, and transportation, and do a full transition off of that. I left public office in 2018, a bit spurred by Trump's election in the States and a belief that I felt like I had more to bring from outside of public office, although I was grateful for good people who are willing to run and be there. I did a fellowship at Harvard in civic leadership and ended up back here last year. And I'm now teaching about power, not energy power, but power, the power we need to change energy and energy grids out at UBC. And I also support courageous leadership here and internationally on issues like climate and renewable energy. I'm really fortunate today to be joined by a co-host, Zoe Ng. Zoe's with us from Sustainabiliteens. She's a youth activist and currently coordinates the Vancouver-Richmond Sustainabiliteens regional group. She attends school at Sir Winston Churchill Secondary and is going into grade 12 this coming year. Zoe is very passionate about climate justice and is involved in various organizations surrounding climate action and sustainability. Zoe, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Andrea. Hello, everyone, panelists. I'm so excited for our discussion today, and I will begin by briefly talking about Sustainabiliteens. So Sustainabiliteens is a movement of young people across Metro Vancouver. We are an entirely youth-led group that organized all of the climate strikes in Metro Vancouver last year, including September 27th, which was the largest protest in city's history. We are united by the urgency we feel to stop climate catastrophe and by a shared vision to create a more just and sustainable world. We exist to create a space for youth to engage with these issues and lay the foundations for a future that we can look forward to. Sustainabiliteens believes that as the economy reopens from COVID-19, it is crucial that we build back better and ensure a green and just recovery. As a result from the high financial demand of the COVID response, government budgets and working power have been stretched thin. However, it is critical that as we recover, we are not sacrificing climate action, nor the social programs and services that serve our most vulnerable communities. Rather, with the billions of stimulus spending to get our economy back up and running again, we need to invest in the programs and services that support our most vulnerable and invest in big climate change solutions. As well, we need to address the failings of the status quo and attend to the social inequalities that have been pervasive throughout our city, province, and country. The decisions made today at this critical time will have a direct impact on my generation and future generations' quality of life. While the COVID crisis is devastating, it has given us the momentum and a chance to change our system and create a better world for everybody. Oop, Andrea, I think you're muted.
I'm back. You'd think after months of Zoom that we'd all have this down, but apparently you can still forget to unmute yourself. So Zoe put it really well. I don't know what I can add around green and just recovery other than to say it's a big topic. We were talking just before you all got here, that it's a lot to do in an hour and a half. You've heard it called many names, whether it's green and just recovery or building back better or green recovery. Before the pandemic, it was Green New Deal. You had concepts like donut economics and other things that were gateways for people into this discussion. I think now that we've gone through or going through COVID-19 and the pandemic, there's one concept to keep in mind. We have one shot. This is a once in 100-year opportunity, if not more than that, to reset the trajectory that we're on. This is an incredible opportunity that doesn't come along very often. So there's never been more important time for the discussion that we're having. And it was, before the pandemic, a critical breaking point on environment. We are and were in a critical climate crisis. We had social systems, we had the fast violence that we saw through income inequality, and then the slow violence of over systemic racism that has been eroding communities and killing individuals within those communities for many years. So that's a lot to cover in an hour and a half, and we're not going to try and do all of that in an hour and a half. And we're hosted today by 4R Kids, and their focus is on climate. So we'll be looking at the topics today through the lens of justice, but we'll be focusing directly down on climate. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Zoe to lead us through the opening statements from our panelists today.
Thank you, Andrea, for your remarks. Yes, so we will now be moving into opening statements, the first being from Chief Leah George Wilson of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Chief Leah, we welcome your thoughts on a green and just recovery. You can go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to Christy for inviting me here today. I'm happy to be here and to see all of you. From a First Nations and Indigenous community perspective, I think people need to consider where we came from. We've always been here, we will always be here, but so much has happened to us culturally, socially, economically, in terms of the structure that's built around us, the way that colonization has occurred, its impact on us, on our own structures within our territory, the physical health and safety of our community. These are all things that our communities worry about, and COVID has been stressful for everybody, but more so in our communities because our populations are so vulnerable. And we're impacted not just by the pandemic, but also by the political structures and the laws and the other things that have happened to us, including pandemics previous to this, which decimated our population. So we're starting, for the recovery, we're facing a little bit more than average communities. But through it all, Tsleil-Waututh has always found a way to manage, a way to lead in our own economic recovery, our own cultural revitalization, and our environmental progress across our territory and Canada. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of experience in recovering from different kinds of impacts. But for this green and just recovery from COVID, in our view, we should be prioritizing investment in true environmental sustainability. We should be accounting for social and economic well-being, justice for historically marginalized people, support for Indigenous sovereignty focused on cultural, environmental, and community health of First Nations. Like Andrea said, this is a really incredible opportunity to start shifting Canada and BC's economies from an environmentally unsustainable one to one based on the extraction of, which had been based on the extraction from Indigenous lands and resources, and direct our shared pathway forward to pursue sustainable and socially inclusive future. I mean, you just have to look around. You've seen pictures of Italy, for example, where since the shutdown from COVID, they're saying that the canals in Venice are cleaner than they've ever been. You've seen the pictures of Los Angeles, where you'd only be able to see smog, and you actually can see the city. And here, I know some of my friends who live in the city of Vancouver have said there had always been a haze around Mount Baker, but since the shutdown, they can see it clearly, more clearly today. That's an incredible opportunity for us to seize if we want to reverse some of the things that have happened to our earth, our environment. And I think because of the shutdown and the shelter at home and the less movement of cars and of tanker traffic, we've seen killer whales coming back into Burrard Inlet. And for my community, that's an incredible sign. We're so happy to see that whales are coming back, and we need to continue to protect, because as an Indigenous person, that's my Indigenous responsibility and role in our world, is to protect the land and the environment for future generations. I've lost track on what time my time is, so I'll just stop there. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you, Chief George Wilson. Next, I'd like to introduce the Honourable George Heyman, Member of the Legislative Assembly for Vancouver-Fairview and BC's Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. We are happy to have you here, Minister. Please go ahead with your opening remarks when you're ready.
Thanks. I lost control of the mute button to the host. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. I want to thank for our kids for organizing this Zoom town hall and for taking up on behalf of your kids and everyone's kids this important issue, and encouraging a dialogue on it, and encouraging elected officials to come and talk about the issue from our perspective, as well as, most importantly, to hear from you and from young people to talk about your and their perspective on what needs to be done, impressions of what we're doing, impressions of what we're not doing. It's all important. We took office just one day less than 3 years ago in British Columbia. We came into office knowing that while BC had the only effective carbon tax in North America, it had been frozen, and while it had shown leadership at one point in North America and arguably in other parts of the world, that leadership had fallen by the wayside and nothing effectively had happened. So we determined to be more accountable, and to be more accountable by revisiting the targets that had been set. The first one was out of reach and impossible to meet, coming up in a little less than 2 years. So we set a 2030, a 2040, and a 2050 target. But more importantly, we committed to develop and model a pathway of a number of measures and actions and economic development proposals that could get us there. And we released that in December of 2018, modeling 75% of the pathway with some ideas about the remaining 25% and a commitment to release those by the end of this year. We've begun that work, whether it's legislating targets for zero emission vehicles, putting in cleaner fuel standards, putting in programs to save energy in homes and buildings, promoting active transportation and investing in the infrastructure that supports that, working with industry to lower emissions in our traditional industries, and to promote our tech sector and other sectors that are developing measures that can reduce emissions, not just here in British Columbia, but potentially around the world, and create good opportunities for people to work, to do healthy work, to do fulfilling work, to do work that will support their families here in British Columbia. I don't want to go down the complete laundry list of what we're working on. I'm sure I'll have other opportunities during questions, but we named our plan Clean BC. We intended it to be both an emissions reduction plan as well as an economic strategy, and we've been working on that. One of the successes we had was to come very close, within less than 1% of our 2025 zero emission vehicle sales target by the end of last year, because the measures we put in place to help people afford zero emission vehicles were wildly popular and wildly successful. And then COVID hit. And we know if we look back to the recession of 2008, emissions went down as the economy went into recession. And unfortunately, when the economy came back, emissions rose higher than ever. I'm very aware of that. Our government's very aware of that. We're committed to not repeat that. So we committed very early in response to people raising it with us that we did want climate commitments and Clean BC to be at the center of the economic recovery and the stimulus that we committed to provide, which is currently set at 1.5 billion. And we're currently working through a number of proposals from outside government as well as inside government for those investments. We created in Cabinet a set of values to apply to decisions around the recovery. Meeting our climate commitments is at the center of it. Advancing reconciliation is another one of the values that we want to use as a screen. Inclusivity, ensuring that no one is left behind, knowing that young people and women are the most adversely impacted by the job losses of COVID, as they have traditionally been unequal partners in the benefits of economic development in British Columbia. We want to spread our measures around the province, and we want to use stimulus to promote and develop a more sustainable economy, a more diversified economy, a more modern economy, an economy that's suited to a low carbon, carbon neutral future that we all want. We have a lot of work to do. It's going to be hard. Not everybody in British Columbia supports the kind of work we're proposing, because people tend to be used to what they're used to, especially if what they're used to is a job in a particular sector. So we have to pay attention to workers and communities, bring people along, ensure that they're included, ensure that they see a just future for themselves in the transition, as well as a better future for their children. And I'll leave it at that for introductory comments.
Thank you, Minister, for your remarks. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Jenny Kwan, who is a Member of Parliament for Vancouver's East. Ms. Kwan, we welcome your opening remarks whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you very much, and hello, everyone. It's so great to be on this town hall, and thank you to all the organizers, the people behind the scenes in making this happen, in elevating the conversation to say Build Back Better is and has to be the path forward. So what does that mean? Coming out of the pandemic to be stronger and more resilient, right? This is the key question that we have to answer. And I would say it is the obligation of governments to respond to. So now, just before we get too deep into some of the measures, I just want to step back and look and see where we were at, in fact, before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were actually going to fail to meet our emission targets, right? In fact, based on what was tabled in the throne speech, the federal throne speech last year, we will be 175 million tons away from reaching our emission reduction targets in 2030. And we will only have reached our weak Paris Agreement reduction targets in 2030. That's 200 years behind schedule. I just want to put that out there for a minute, right? For us to really think about what we're talking about. And so unless if the federal government means what they say, our planet will not survive. That, I think, is the reality. Bold action is needed for a green and just recovery that's centered around the everyday people, the people in need, and frankly, not the ultra rich. And I say this not to be glib. I say this because there is so much analysis that needs to be had and action that needs to be taken on the basis of that statement. Strong programs need to come with strong foundation for the very people that it is supposed to serve. So for me, let's start with a bold national housing strategy. Investments for the people across the country. We have a housing crisis prior to COVID, and during COVID, it's been amplified. It's really highlighted the vulnerabilities of people with COVID. And people are being pushed right here in Vancouver East from one encampment to another, from Oppenheimer Park to the Port parking lot, now to Strathcona. And if we want immediate action to address these issues, the federal government could be a real partner at the table. What does that mean? The federal government could, for example, agree to a 50-50 cost share with the provincial government, with BC Housing, to purchase empty buildings, empty hotels, to house the people who are homeless now, provide the support programs in place, and house people immediately. That is an option that we can choose to act on today and is entirely doable. We can choose to work with the nonprofits on the ground, day in, day out, essential workers who's doing this incredible work, then we can be a real partner with them, with the local governments who want to be a partner at the table, the City of Vancouver. And so we need to have an aggressive strategy also, in my view, to prevent predatory asset purchases by big corporations. Money cannot be the driver here, and people has to be the lead. And government can secure these assets for the people in collaboration with the province, with the city, and with the nonprofit agencies on the ground. Retrofits should be a major part of the initiatives. If we're going to talk about climate action, imagine, just imagine for 1 minute, every house has a solar roof panel on top to fuel its energy requirements. Just imagine that for 1 minute. For all the buildings that are out there, that could be a major aspect of what we can go forward with. I'm not talking just about energy efficiency, and I'm talking about changing our energy needs and how it is sourced. We opened with the Chief's words about historical injustices and the impact of colonialism. And right now, we need an urban, rural, and remote Indigenous housing strategy for Indigenous peoples by Indigenous people. We don't have that strategy right now. That's not part of the plan, even in the current National Housing Strategy. How could that be? They are the first peoples, and yet they're not even there as part of the plan. So we need to actually put words to action and deal with these issues in a real and serious way. Now, people will say that we can't do this. Well, let me just say this. We have done this, by the way. And let's get back to building social housing and co-op housing like we did in the 1970s and the 80s. And along with this, we need to invest massively in a transit network. If we don't get people out of the cars, we're not going to affect climate action in a real way. And so we need to do that, and that investment will pay dividend, absolutely, for the here and the now and for the future. We also need to be looking at how we can become less reliant on foreign production. COVID has taught us the need to strengthen our own production and manufacturing capacity, from personal protective equipment to electric vehicles to solar panels to hydrogen in motion, and the list goes on. And if you can imagine it, we can build it. And that's got to be the focus. The federal government can, in fact, create a new federal transfer specifically to address climate emergency and just transitions. Establish just transition agencies for each province with joint governance from the federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous governments. Include labor, business, academic, NGO representatives, youth, and your voice. Be at the table and put in place a good jobs guarantee for energy workers. If we put these foundational pieces in place, we can build on the strength of these programs. In taking care of the future, we also need to turn to our past. 80% of the COVID-19 deaths in Canada have happened in long-term care homes, impacting seniors disproportionately. And we need to have national standards and a seniors care guarantee. We need to take the profit out of long-term care, frankly. And on the provision of healthcare, let's complete Tommy Douglas's dream with universal pharmacare, head-to-toe healthcare that includes dental care. And let's treat addiction as a health issue. There's another crisis going on right now, and people are dying. People are dying right here in Vancouver East, in the downtown East Side. And let's deal with the addiction issue as a health issue and not a criminal justice issue. And when we're talking about just recovery, we must also know that there is no recovery without a she recovery. Universal national childcare has been in the making for 26 years. 26 years. It is good for the child, it is good for the parents, and it's good for the economy, it's good for business, and it should be front and center in any recovery plan. And to do it right, we must recognize Canada's colonial past. The UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People should not just be in theory, but in practice. Free, prior, informed consent must be honored in charting our path forward. I know in listing all these priorities and many others that are not mentioned, people will ask, where will the money come from? Well, let's just take this for a spin. When Canada's top 1% holds...
Annie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're well over time, and there is a question that covers that off, so I might move us to the question section.
Okay.
So that, yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. It's always awkward on Zoom.
Okay, well, no worries. I just want to say that there are ways to pay for this, and it's about priorities and political determination. So I'll close with that.
Thank you very much. Zoe, I'll turn it back over to you for the last panelist to do their opening remarks.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kwan. We love your passion. And last but not least is our Vancouver City Councillor, Christine Boyle. Please go ahead and give us your thoughts on a green and just recovery.
Sure. Thank you for having me join. I am honored to be in this company and to get to do this work with you all. So I think the first thing I want to emphasize is how important I think it is that we be approaching our climate work with a sense of the emergency that it is. And I don't just mean that we declare that it's an emergency. I mean that all of our actions declare that it's an emergency and communicate that, and that how we talk about the climate crisis communicates that it's an emergency. You know, I can get excited about the sort of wonky policy details, but if we're not screaming from the rooftop that we need to be doing that work because of the urgency of the crisis, I don't think they get as far. So I think both in the scale of the actions and the ambition in them, as well as how we talk about them, we need to be communicating the urgency that quite frankly people feel, so that we continue moving more and more quickly, ramping up our ambition as we go. And to that point, I think it's so critical, as we heard earlier, that the targets that we set not be the Paris targets, but they be the science targets, that we be looking at what the IPCC is requiring of us and setting that as, like, quite frankly, our bare minimum. That is the minimum speed at which we need to be reducing our emissions and taking action on this, because the alternative is so unbearable, unacceptable. So Vancouver is doing that work. You know, Vancouver has been leading on climate work for decades in a variety of ways. And so I feel very lucky to have been elected in 2018 into a legacy and an infrastructure and a commitment to this type of work. Vancouver declared a climate emergency and has been rolling out ambitious plans to meet that emergency. The plan that we came out with in response to that included 6 big moves, and I'm not going to go into all of the detail of them, but I'll post a link to more detail in the chat for folks who want to really get into the dirt of it. But the bulk of it is focused on our building emissions and our transportation emissions, which are the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in cities, and not always the sexiest or easiest to be tackling. But in knowing that we need to be reducing our emissions ambitiously, we need to look at both of those areas. So it means walkable neighborhoods and climate-friendly density. It means zero-emission homes, much more public and active transportation, zero-emission vehicles. It also means looking at negative emissions, because not as an excuse to not act fast enough, but as a reality that we haven't yet acted fast enough. And so we need to be looking at restoring forests and coasts and what our plan is on that front. And then, as others said, and then COVID hit. And so we face a couple big challenges as a local government and other local governments similarly in the green and just recovery. And one of them is the challenge of public transit. So an ambitious expansion of public transit is a key part for Vancouver of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. The budgetary situation at TransLink makes that challenging, but also the reality of people's nervousness about getting back on the public transportation system before a vaccine is a, you know, just is a very hard, real challenge for us. And so we need to be looking at how we do more on the active transportation side, and how we work with TransLink to try to, you know, get bus priority lanes, so the buses are coming more often, so that even well spaced out, more people can ride on them, and other transit solutions like that. But the other big obstacle for us as a local government is our budget. So we aren't able to run a deficit, and cities for a long time have just had a very narrow set of fiscal tools. So we really just have this sort of blunt instrument of a property tax. We aren't currently able to have progressive property taxes, so everyone pays the same rate, regardless of how much property you live in. And for all the talk that we hear about local governments leading on climate and celebrating that, which I'm glad to hear, our lack of fiscal tools is a real barrier to us being able to continue to lead on this and make a real impact. And so I think that budget piece needs to be a key part of the conversation, and some new fiscal deal for cities that gives us the fiscal tools that we need to continue to lead on this. I could say much more on that. I know we have some interesting questions, so I'll wrap up and look forward to more of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Councillor Boyle, and of course, Jenny Kwan, the MP, and Minister Heyman and Chief George Wilson. This is always a challenge of Zoom calls, right? Because there's no body language and we're making eye contact, but through a screen with our necks not moving and all that. So how to bring you into the discussion? So we're gonna try that. We're gonna put a poll up on the screen that all of you can answer. And it's not a popularity contest. The idea was to get a sense of which of the statements most resonated with your ideas about green and just recovery, because I think it helps all of the decision makers on the call to know kind of like this term, when we use terms like green, that isn't even always like something we're all understanding the same thing on. So it's an opportunity for them to see from you as an audience, how you, when you're thinking about green just recovery, what comes to mind for you? Because we're all, I think all levels of government, I know all levels of government, all orders of government are actively in discussions right now. So I think it's a great opportunity to help them wind into their thinking around it. So I'll give you guys a minute to vote, and then we're going to move into the question round. And I know some of you have been putting questions into the box, which is great. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat and those questions and try and wind them in. You'll see 4 very broad themes that are represented in the questions that we put to panelists. We gave them the questions in advance based on pre-survey from all of you so that they'd have a chance to respond in a thoughtful way and get the research and information that they needed. So we'll do our best to sort of balance that off. And then there's always a chance that we can follow up with them as well on things we can't get through today. All right, I'm gonna give the poll like another 5 seconds. So last chance to get in votes. This is the going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, so reasonably even. Jenny, you got a lot of support there. I think that the addition of the housing, I'm guessing if I drill down a little farther in a city like Vancouver, that's gonna be highly resonant with folks. So thank you for that. And Zoe, I will turn it over to you to start the question round.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. We will now be moving into the question portion. I think Andrea has already mentioned this, but our questions were informed by the questions that was submitted by the audience in advance upon registration. And we want to note that there were so many thoughtful questions, and we've done our best to represent the interests of the audience tonight in our selection. So now we will be moving into the first question for our panelists, which is, what are the biggest policies and programs that the government needs to stop to ensure that a green and just recovery is not reliant on indefinite, perpetual growth, mass consumerism, and oppressions of racialized and vulnerable populations? This is a reminder to keep all comments to 1 minute or to allow for follow-up discussion, but if you have to say anything very dire, you may go ahead. We will start with Minister Heyman, so just please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to try to answer the question as asked, but I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way. I think if we're talking about moving to a low carbon economy, there's a clear implication that we're going to reduce emissions in existing parts of the economy, and we're going to develop parts of the economy that are low or zero carbon and find ways to deal with the residuals. But I see the issue not as stop and then replace something, but as beginning a transition, building up the pieces of the economy and incentives and ways of living that we want and need to move, and then shifting into them. And in much the same way as sometimes when people are doing an energy efficiency renovation of their home or apartment, they're shrunk down into a small living space while they create the new space to move into, and then are able to move into it. So that is in fact what our Clean BC program is about. It's about reducing emissions in transportation by promoting through incentives and regulations, zero emission vehicles, working on, we've begun work on how we can reduce emissions in the heavy duty trucking industry and the movement of goods, both by reducing distances and providing alternatives for both long and short haul. We're looking at, as I said, finding and trying new incentive programs that not only let the wealthy or upper middle class think about energy efficiency in their homes, but everyone think about energy efficiency in their homes, including landlords, so that that renters are able to live in energy efficient homes and apartments, and not have to bear the burden of high energy costs caused by the lack of energy efficiency or a retrofitting program that makes sense. We're working on building codes, working with municipalities and particularly the city of Vancouver, and moving toward basically a net zero standard. So there are a whole range of things we're doing. We're also promoting the circular economy, which reduces waste. British Columbia has the most advanced extended producer responsibility system and recycling system in North America, and we're working on including even more products and therefore more producers to make it better. We have been working on a plastic strategy that was quite widespread and extensive, from whether it was ocean plastic debris, single-use plastics, recycling of more materials, and we'll be announcing it in the near future. Things were derailed a bit with COVID. We're going to keep saying that because it's simply a fact, but that is one of the ways that we can reduce waste, it changes the nature of consumerism, and it changes the nature of waste. We're also working and taking very seriously the issue of inclusivity, of equity, and particularly of reconciliation. So we brought in the BC Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Before we brought in that act, we completely revitalized the Environmental Assessment Act, which was a priority of the First Nations Leadership Council, and we built right into the purposes of the Environmental Assessment Office is to advance reconciliation in accordance with the UN Declaration. And the most significant change from a reconciliation standpoint is engagement with Indigenous people from the very start of a project proposal, rather than leaving it to a matter of responding after all of the work has been done without being presented publicly. Similarly, we've set in place engagement processes for local communities, and we've put in place a range of values that need to be accounted for and tested, and projects need to be gauged against, including ecosystem integrity and biodiversity, and impacts on our legislated climate change targets. So we are working on many fronts to try to build the economy of the future so that we can transition out of the economy of the past.
Thank you, Minister Heyman. So I'm just going to flag for the other panelists, because I'm sure you could tell that was a bit longer than a minute. This is one of the challenges, the asymmetry. It's hard to, when you're on a stage moderating, I can kind of glower over you and kind of like send that body language. It's very hard to do over Zoom. And to say with the minister on the call, of course, we're anxious to hear your views on this issue. You did an excellent job of answering question 2 about the new things that we would start, but did not answer question 1 very well, which is about what we would stop. So I think what we'll do, the rest of the panelists, if you can answer the stop question, that would be great. And then when we move to question 2, Minister, we'll ask you to talk about what your government might stop as it's starting up all the good things you just spoke to. So Zoe, I'll turn it back to you for the rest of this question.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. I think you said everything we wanted to say. But for the next reply, we would like to hear from Ms. Kwan. So when you're ready, go ahead.
Thanks very much. I'll be more mindful of my time. On the question around what to stop, I would say first, stop the exploitation of migrant workers and grant them status on arrival. I think that is horrendous what's happening right now with the migrant workers. We need to stop corporate handouts to the fossil fuel industry. And in fact, I think we need to cancel all fossil fuel subsidies, including what the federal government does, and that is through the Export Development Canada arena. We need to stop, frankly, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And we need to redirect all of those resources to clean energy initiatives. If we're going to be serious about climate action, that's what we need to do. We need to stop the tax havens and the loopholes for the ultra rich and to redirect those resources to everyday Canadians. And we need to stop taking Indigenous peoples to court and honor their basic human rights. And we need to stop criminalizing the poor and put humanity at the forefront, at the front and center of the work that we need to do.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kwan, for your response. Next, we would like to hear from Councillor Boyle, so go ahead when you're ready, please.
Sure, thanks. So I wanted to answer first what we as a local government and other local governments need to stop, which is that we need to stop exclusionary zoning. We need to stop zoning huge swaths of our cities only for big single-family homes and wealthy residents. We need to stop banning apartments in large parts of our cities. We also need to stop prioritizing private cars in how we design our transportation systems and in things like parking minimum policies for new buildings. That's local government stuff that we can and should be doing. And then to my colleagues in other levels of government and us as well, we absolutely need a clear line on no new fossil fuel infrastructure, which in cities I think is about our transportation systems as well, but at other levels it's about not building or supporting new pipelines. It's also about not investing and subsidizing in liquefied natural gas. It's about really centering the rights of Indigenous land rights and prioritizing that as part of our energy conversation. I just, you know, respectfully feel so clearly that we need a hard line on no new fossil fuel infrastructure as part of the transition, and in buildings and transportation, we have a role to play as a local government in the kinds of priorities that we make too.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Those were great responses. Next, we would like to hear from Chief George Wilson. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. What do we need to stop? We need to stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, as the last speakers have said. We need to stop supporting large fossil fuel companies. We need to stop investing in fossil fuel industries. We need to stop prioritizing large corporations over the needs of the people, especially vulnerable populations and the overall community's health and well-being. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Chief George Wilson. So thank you all panelists for your responses. We will be moving on to the second question for the panelists, which is, what are the biggest new policies and programs that we need to start doing in order to drastically reduce our CO2 emissions and most quickly transition off of fossil fuels? And just a reminder to Minister Heyman that he will be answering the first question about what we need to stop. But first, we would like to hear from Ms. Kwan. So go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I touched on some of these issues, but I would say first off, let's engage in a massive investment in the transit network. I actually firmly believe if you built it, they will come. And this is what we got to do. You want to get people out of the cars, build that transit network, make it convenient, reliable. And you know what? Free transit should not be just some vague idea somewhere far down into the distant future. It needs to be at the forefront to get us there and to get us out of the cars. I think that we also need to build housing. I'm just going to keep saying this until I'm old and gray, until we get it done. Invest in housing, invest in the people, house the homeless, not 10 years from now, do it now. We can do it. We have the resources, we have the capacity, do it. And then when we do this work, and I talked a little bit about the retrofit program earlier, I don't know why we can't just move forward with that. We have the technology. So let's just say we're going to do this, use this moment in time as a result of COVID, and then just to break down the doors, break down those imaginary barriers to say what the future could be. If we listen to the young people, if we participated in the Friday strikes, and if we hear the message that is out there, then we have the ideas. And all we need, frankly, is a political commitment to make it happen. So all the things that we don't want to see with COVID-19, those are the very things that we need to act on. No more delays. Let's get on with it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kwan. Next, we would like to hear from Councillor Boyle. So go ahead when you're ready.
Great. I am just so happy to hear Jenny, who is my MP, talking about housing and transit. Those are huge. Those are where we need to focus on every level. So again, at a city level, to start there, I think we need firm lines on zero emission buildings. We need to get natural gas out of all of our buildings across the city in a very ambitious way. I think we need to be implementing carbon pricing as part of our transition away from private vehicles and as a funding mechanism. I know that'll be a hard conversation, but I think it's one we need to keep having and start moving on. We need PACE financing so that people can be financing retrofits, and we need to be looking at public investments that help make building retrofits possible, particularly for our more affordable housing stock and for social housing and nonprofit housing across the city. As I said before, the city and local governments across the country need more fiscal tools so that we can be funding and investing in the types of programs that we so badly need. And again, I just couldn't agree more about the importance of a national housing strategy and housing being seen as a key part of a green and just recovery. I'd love to see federal and provincial investments in public housing and making publicly built, publicly supported housing an action we're taking, not a dirty word anymore. There's a lot we can do in partnering with co-ops and nonprofits, and I think the government has a larger role, and that is a climate action that we're building walkable neighborhoods and mixed income neighborhoods across our city, and investing in transit and making it free. I'll just say ditto to all of what we've heard so far.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Next, we would like to hear from Chief George Wilson when you're ready.
Thank you. We'll make sure I'm unmuted. Thank you. I think that we need to, as we said, what we need to stop, what we need to start is the investment and prioritization in green infrastructure. We need to help people get into like solar energy, as the Tsleil-Waututh Nation government has. We need to, well, that Clean BC plan that Minister Heyman was speaking to can be an important guide for reducing the emissions from industry, transportation, and buildings, and transitioning to clean energy jobs. You need programs to help support jobs and people when we're transitioning to a newer economy. We need to consider what we're doing with Bill 17, which would strip out the requirement that the province be self-sufficient in electricity. I mean, if we had a number of First Nations like the Tsleil-Waututh with the solar energy farm, they could potentially be selling energy to British Columbia, so we wouldn't have to be purchasing from Alberta or the United States. And of course, we need to uphold the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief George Wilson. And now, Minister Heyman, we invite you to respond to the first question.
Definitely. Okay, sorry. We need to stop facilitating planned obsolescence. We need to stop facilitating disposable goods and instead move toward a circular economy and producer responsibility for goods. We need to stop prioritizing sprawl and opposing density. We need to stop focusing so much on individual transportation instead of facilitating effective and accessible public transportation. We need to stop developing projects without accounting for Indigenous rights, for cumulative impacts, as well as for greenhouse gas emissions and impacts on ecosystems. And that's why I mentioned the Environmental Assessment Act, which was redone in partnership with Indigenous people and took effect last December. Oh, one more thing, and I think we need to stop prioritizing volume over value in timber products.
Okay, thank you, Minister Heyman. Since I think we are running a bit behind schedule, we are just going to jump to question 3, which is, how do we ensure that the voices of Indigenous people, racialized and marginalized populations, including youth, are not only at the table, but are actually heard and their concerns prioritized ahead of corporate interests in developing a green and just recovery? So for our first panelist would be Councillor Boyle, when you're ready.
I think one key piece is about our elections. It's about electing more diverse voices, and electoral reform is part of that. Local governments have been asking for options for electoral reform at the local level. I think it's important at every level because it allows us to elect governments that better represent our residents. That representation is also important in the organizations that all of us are part of, and the climate movement, as we all know, has a long history of being very white. And so all of us have some responsibility in looking at the organizations that we're part of and lifting up and amplifying new voices, stepping back and out of the way sometimes to make space for those voices. And then I also want to say, I think it's needs to be part of the types of policies that we push too. So one of the examples I like to lift up is around our transportation investments, the difference in terms of equity between investing in incentives for private electric vehicles versus incentives for a robust public transit network, even incentives for electric bicycles. Similarly, on retrofits, are we retrofitting private single-family homes, or are we retrofitting social housing and existing affordable rental buildings? So there are a lot of decisions in which we need at every level to be taking a stronger equity lens in who benefits most in where we're putting our money and our priorities.
Thank you so much, Councillor Boyle. Next, we will be hearing from Chief George Wilson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. How do we ensure that our voices are heard? I think we would need some changes to the political structures that would allow for true joint decision-making within our territories. Of course, the application of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People to all of British Columbia's laws and policies, including laws that existed prior to the DRIPA legislation last fall, and legally recognizing Indigenous sovereignty and laws in unceded territories, which among other issues means that projects impacting Aboriginal rights and title can only proceed with appropriate free, prior, and informed consent. While it's true that First Nations Leadership Council was part of a working group working on the Environmental Assessment Act, it is not true that we were involved in the Clean Energy Act, which is Bill 17. There was no consultation and no upholding of DRIPA. So it would be great if we could move to those kinds of priorities that could help ensure that Indigenous voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief George Wilson. Minister Heyman, whenever you're ready.
The unmute button keeps moving around. I apologize. Much of what I would say has been referenced by others, particularly Chief George Wilson. And I think, you know, it is a process. People have said reconciliation is a process, which is why we introduced the BC Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, and why in that act it talks about developing a work plan with Indigenous people to review existing acts and to work together moving forward, notwithstanding Chief George Wilson's comment. I also think that when we built the new Environmental Assessment Act, it was built on the principle of a consent-based process. And we have yet to, because projects and their approvals move slowly, we have yet to actually try and test. We're in the beginning stages of a couple of projects, but see how that works and see how that works for everyone, Indigenous people, proponents, the government, the local community. But the secret really is trying to create structures that are built around dialogue, and are built around dialogue at an early stage, not we have a plan and now we will consult you on it and see if you like it. And when people don't like it, try to find ways to mute the opposition because so much is already invested in the plan. Similarly with young people. So the basis of this forum is around climate change and a clean and just recovery. So one of the areas where we have had the finance minister, the premier, myself, we've had a couple of calls with the Climate Solutions Council that was appointed by government. It's a diverse council with voices from young people, with voices from Indigenous people, with voices from labor, from the environmental movement, as well as business, the tech sector, and industry. And they came to a remarkable consensus that supports investment in the kinds of economic recovery that would be clean and just, that I think most people on this call would support.
Thank you, Minister Heyman. We will be hearing from Ms. Kwan now.
Well, thank you very much. I also want to reiterate the need for electoral reform. Absolutely, we need to change the electoral system first and foremost. I would also say from the federal government, we need to enact the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We need to honor and respect free, prior, and informed consent. Because if we don't, all of this is meaningless in the way that we have not learned from our colonial history. We need to legislate an environmental bill of rights, create an independent climate accountability office for accountability for our climate goals. We need to fix the broken environmental assessment process once and for all. Give communities a stronger voice in energy decisions and provide core funding to support Indigenous communities' participation and youth participation. And let us just stop debating about whether or not there is systemic racism amongst many of our institutions, including the RCMP. There is, full stop. And let's get on with rooting it out. And lastly, I have to mention this, is that we need action on the calls for justice for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We cannot accept the idea that somehow that COVID-19 has caused a delay and that somehow is justifiable. So, you know, there's so many excuses, but there's so many nice words, but we need to just sort of get on with doing it. And maybe we can, you know, create the kind of change that we all hope for, and what this town hall is about, and what all the strikes on Fridays and the continuous actions is all about to make that change. We owe it, and we have that responsibility to make it happen as elected officials.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kwan. I think there's a lot of support in the chat for everything you said. Also, thank you for all panelists for your responses so far. I think we're going to move into question 4 directly, and I don't think we'll be having enough time for discussion today, but all the responses have been so great so far. So for question 4, what can we do to make sure you have the public support you need to get support from a majority of your colleagues for a green and just recovery? We will first be hearing from Councillor Boyle whenever you're ready.
Thanks. So I am an organizer by training and at heart, and that's what I would say in answer. It's so critical, not just that we shout from the rooftops, but that we organize people, that we bring more people in, that we create space for them, that we mobilize people to show up at key decision point moments, that we amplify underrepresented voices, that we connect all of these issues between housing and climate and transportation and racism and policing, that we find those connecting points, and we keep putting pressure on every level. I also want to say my experience is that there are allies all over the place. And so one of the organizing tasks is creating the political space for them to move and for them to bring their colleagues along, to make better decisions, to increase ambition at every level. That we be hard on issues and soft on people so that those allies within the system can keep doing the work with us, and we're not demonizing any one person, but continuing to push and continuing to bring people along. So organize, 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 come and show up at City Hall and tell us to do better and tell us to do more. I'll say also, I'll just squeeze it in, the local government level, we read all our own emails, we're understaffed, we hear from you. It's so critical that people reach out to local government officials and show up, because I have seen how much of a difference it makes. The Vancouver Climate Emergency Declaration passed unanimously because the Sustainabiliteens and student climate strikers showed up and pressured us to make it unanimous, to make it impossible to vote against. So keep doing all of that incredible work.
Thank you so much, Councillor Boyle. We will be hearing from Minister Heyman next, whenever you're ready.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizers again and the moderators for this panel. And I'm here because it's important to speak with people directly. And I see a number of people on the screens that I've met with over the years, one-on-one in my constituency office and occasionally in Victoria. So what can you do? Keep meeting with elected officials. Keep telling them what you want to see. Respond to public consultations by government, and there currently is one on green recovery at engage.gov.bc.ca/recovery ideas. Keep talking to me, keep supporting the things that you see that are good, that you want to see more of. Keep expressing your views, and keep raising awareness in the community, because it's not enough if 20% of people want climate action. It has to be well over 50. And I believe it is, but for many people, they don't know what that looks like and they don't see hope in it. So we need to communicate hope and a positive future. So do that as well.
Thank you, Minister Heyman. We will now be hearing from Ms. Kwan, whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you. I think you're already doing it. Putting together this town hall, the activities prior to COVID, it all brings us to that place. And what are we trying to do is to bring awareness. We're trying to amplify each other's voice, as Christine was mentioning, to ensure that the underrepresented voices are heard loud and clear. We need to demand results and accountability. We need to actually not take no for an answer and not accept excuses. Pretty words don't cut it anymore, and we don't have to accept the status quo. Remember that you have the power. We can have a better tomorrow. Better is actually possible, and we don't have to keep on choosing between bad and worse. There's a different choice. And yes, in a democracy, the ultimate power is in the hands of the people. Exercise that in the ballot box.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kwan. And last but definitely not least, we have Chief George Wilson for her remark.
Thank you. I agree with the comments from Jenny Kwan that, you know, you are doing it right now. We need to continue to push governments to change their policies and support ambitious climate plans and uphold the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Indigenous nations must have true, free, prior, and informed consent when it comes to all projects across their respective territories. We need to support the work that nations are currently doing to stop fossil fuel expansions, for example, I don't know, Trans Mountain expansion, and to improve the environment. Like in our area, it's the Burrard Inlet Action Plan, the climate change adaptation. If you were in the more central part of British Columbia, you would be looking to support the Tsleil-Waututh Nation government with their solar energy farm. If you're on the island, there's the Nuu-Chah-Nulth Tribal Council. They have a number of independent energy producers there as well. Support those kinds of things. We need to ensure that what people say at the ministerial level about all the great things that we need to do trickles down to the bureaucrats that are on the ground with you and I to ensure that the message is the same and the work is the same for all of us. We need to support increases to good transportation plans, housing. Housing is important to our community as well. I also want to say thank you to for our kids for having me, and I enjoyed this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief George Wilson. And thank you all panelists for all your responses to the questions. Andrea, do you want to say something around now?
We did have a section on the agenda for the panelists to ask each other's questions. And I think we failed to ask you if you had questions for each other, but it's good, we have a few minutes. So what I might do is ask if you had questions, if you wanted to flag, maybe just put up your hand, one of the panelists, and we can acknowledge you so that you can ask another panelist a question. Chief George Wilson, yeah.
Thank you. My question is to Minister George Heyman. What efforts will your government be taking to, one, understand, quantify, and learn from these improvements, and two, to use these insights to bring about change so that we can continue to see ecosystem improvement and not reverse these important positive gains?
Thank you, Chief. We are going to continue building the structures and the dialogues with both the Leadership Council and individual nations on particular issues that impact title and traditional territories. And we've begun to put the structures in place. We have put structures in place to do that. We'll continue. I think the work plan that has to be developed through DRIPA will take us a lot further to constant dialogue and true reconciliation. In terms of the green recovery generally, I wasn't entirely clear on if you were asking a general or specific question on the green recovery. We have been consulting very, very broadly with, as ministers and as MLAs, with people in our constituencies, with interest groups, with Indigenous people on the climate file. We've put in place structures with Indigenous people on climate preparedness and adaptation, on implementing Clean BC, on making Clean BC relevant to both urban and non-urban Indigenous people and nations. With young people, we are trying through our structures to include broad representation. We'll continue doing that consultation, and we put in place last year a climate change accountability act that includes annual reporting by the minister responsible on exactly what we've done in the preceding year to move toward our targets and to meet the commitments that we made in our budget and 3-year service plan, along with the independent commentary on how we're doing, as well as the advice from the Climate Solutions Council.
Great. Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question, Chief Wilson. George Wilson, my apologies. Jenny, sorry, Ms. Kwan, you had a question.
Well, thank you. Just a very quick question, because in order to move the agenda forward, we do need the federal government to be a real partner at the table. And so my question to Minister Heyman is this: what do you need the federal government to do to support the province's effort?
I think the federal government has a lot of funds that it can make available that can amplify the actions that the provincial government is taking to move climate actions forward. For instance, they have been investing in transit. We certainly need more investment in housing. We need federal support. The other big problem for any federal government is how to bring the provinces together to move in unison, and we all know that provinces across Canada are taking wildly different approaches to climate action. Frankly, our neighbors to the east have been moving backward on climate action. I'm not sure what the federal government can do to change that, but we have to find a way to not just have 1 or 2 or 3 provinces in Canada taking action. We need action across the nation and across the globe.
Thank you, Minister. Not a surprise, I'm guessing that the questions are coming to you, but Councillor Boyle, maybe I might ask you the same question. What could you use from the federal or provincial governments? Oh, sorry, let me unmute you. There you go. Doing it, trying to do it.
Thank you.
Done.
So I think the call for national housing strategy is key. And so my answer is similar. It is that we need investments, particularly as part of a green and just recovery out of COVID. As I said, local governments are so hands tied in terms of the financial tools that we have. We know that austerity only makes recovery from these types of crises worse, and yet we're so limited. And so we've been closing libraries and laying off staff. It's damaging to local communities and our ability to recover. So we need support in that recovery. And then absolutely we need a national housing strategy, large scale, ambitious investment in green public housing that we can be a partner in implementing, and similarly investment in transit projects so that people have the option to get out of their vehicles, and then we can do some of the land use pieces that partner with that to amplify those investments, and those are responsibilities that we should take on, but we need those fiscal tools to make it as ambitious as it needs to be.
Oh, and did you have questions for anyone?
I did. I was going to ask Jenny, ask Ms. Kwan, what we can do at all levels, but as residents and citizens to support the work I see you so clearly doing in trying to push this federal Liberal government to do more on a just and green recovery. How can we be supporting you in that advocacy so we see more of that happening at the federal level? I think Jenny's still muted.
Hopefully on it. Sorry, we lost our better skilled unmuter. Oh, and then we just muted again. Galen, help me. Okay, I think I got it. No, I did not get it.
We are going to figure this out just in time to meet in person again.
There you go.
Okay,
All
I think
right,
I'm unmuted now, yes?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yay, all right. Well, you know, the power of the people, I really, really believe in that. And Christine, as you were talking about organize, 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 I'm an activist by heart. So get out there and make your voice heard. Call on your federal MP. You know, the city of Vancouver is a large place. The province of British Columbia is a large place. Every one of us, if we descended on our member of parliament and demanded action, no matter what party they're from, you know, they're going to have to respond. And ultimately, young people, I urge you, please vote. You matter. Your voice matters. This matters. And so hold all elected officials accountable. And election time, your power is the greatest when you get in there with that marker for the ballot. Make that difference. You don't have to settle for less, and don't tell people that you can't make a difference, because you can. Imagine the change that could happen, and if we choose a different path, we can have electoral reform. We could have climate emergency taken with seriousness, and the recovery could be real. And we can honor Indigenous people who's taken care of this land for thousands and thousands of years. Honor them and their teachings. And remember, we are in it together. And as an elder has taught me, united with one heart. That's what we can do. And that's where we can chart the path forward for change.
Nice, thank you, Jenny. That was a great segue to the final section, which we're going to try and put a poll up here. Let's see. Can you all see that? You can all see that. So we have a poll up, which is out of the priorities we've heard today, which is the most important to you? Now, I know this is tough, right? Because I'm guessing many of us, including me, want all of the things on this list. And I know the people, the panelists, all wanted all the things on this list. But it's to help us provide information back to them about prioritizing it. What do you want to make absolutely sure is on the Green and Just Recovery Plan. So while you're voting, I'm just going to say myself, I really wanted to thank all the panelists for being here with us today. I know it's a Friday afternoon in July. It's a tough time to get people, so I just really want to appreciate you for coming. I want to appreciate all the folks who came to listen to the discussion today. Zoe, you were a fantastic moderator. Thank you so much for taking on that role. And Christy, I'm going to pass it over to you to close us out from For Our Kids. Oh, I'm going to have to unmute again.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. A very, very big thank you to our panel for taking the time today to engage in this important discussion on green and just recovery. As a parent and organizer of this event, it's been incredibly moving to hear my leaders discuss this topic in a meaningful way. Thank you to our moderators, Andrea and Zoe. You've done a wonderful job at facilitating a very thought-provoking, I guess it wasn't a discussion, it was more question and answer, but you guys did a great job today. Thank you so much. And I hope that, you know, listening today inspires further discussions in our families, our workplaces, and most importantly in government on how we can create a better economy and society in the aftermath of this pandemic. Thank you to our organizing team, you know who you are. And as a special thank you to all of our panelists and participants here tonight, For Our Kids Vancouver has donated $230 to the Vancouver Black Therapy and Advocacy Fund, which is a nonprofit initiative that aims to raise funds to make mental health support more accessible to the Black community members in the Lower Mainland. I encourage parents and grandparents to get involved in climate justice however they can. This is the most important thing we can fight for when it comes to our kids, and we can't leave the struggle to the younger generation. They need our help. Sorry, it means a lot to me. So if you'd like to get involved or know or want to know more about For Our Kids Vancouver group, we invite you to join our next planning meeting, which is on August 13th. So you can message us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. For Our Kids, the national group is also hosting monthly welcome calls open to parents and grandparents across Canada. You can join one of those online sessions. And I think the next one is coming up Tuesday, July 28th. So with that being said, thank you to everyone. And have a great night.